Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Paddock Pass podcast and the review of the Thai Grand Prix, round 18 of 2024 MotoGP. I'm Adam. I'm located in the media centre at the Chang International Circuit and what is now a very rainy Buriram. It's pretty much been that sort of panorama all day, but now it's getting much more intense. And that means there's some particularly odd and big bugs flying around. So it might be swooping a little bit in this video if you're watching us on YouTube. I'm delighted to be joined once more, as I have been throughout this week, it feels like, by the new driver, Mr. Neil Morrison, who's located in another corner of this fine establishment. We're nearly there, Neil.
We are 8 days until I'm flying home. It has got to that stage in this flyaway kind of part of the season. But yeah, delighted to say that I don't have to leave in 20 minutes, and there's not someone right behind me screaming loudly into a microphone doing a separate podcast like there was in last week's show. So yeah, I feel like I can actually give you guys my attention this time around.
I don't know, Neil, like Pecco Baganaia, you're pretty good under pressure last time. So I'm hoping the same standards are going to be in place.
I think your editing skills were largely responsible for that ad, to be fair.
And, Neil and I have been doing the Paddock Note shows throughout the weekend here in Thailand. If you're not already subscribed to our Patreon channel, then head to patreon.com Paddock Pass Podcast, sign up to be a Paddock Insider and get that lovely extra content just for $10 a month. And there's loads of other stuff that we're going to be throwing up there in the coming weeks. Neil, especially this Grand Prix, has been on fire in terms of gaining extra audio content with some fascinating interviews with people in the paddock, and we'll tease that at the end of this particular show. But let me introduce Mr. David Emmett. It's a joy to see your face, Dave.
That's one of the most egregious lies I think you've ever told, Adam Wheeler. No, but at least this GP, I wasn't getting up at just unhealthy, depressing, awful times. This one is much more doable. I could go to sleep more or less at my normal time around sort of 2:30 a.m. and still get up and watch MotoGP.
So on that happy note, what was your note for this Grand Prix? What was your grade?
My grade is a 7. It's I sort of went a bit sort of backwards and forwards about it because it's. I mean, the racing was interesting but not exciting, if you see what I mean. I mean, there were some good bits. There was lots of action, but it was a bit sort of like spread out, and there was a lot of waiting for things to happen that ended up not happening. So,
but there was tension.
Oh yeah, there was definitely tension. Yes, there was definitely tension, but there was tension waiting for things to happen that didn't.
Neil, do you agree with Dave? I mean, are you around the 7 mark, a bit lower, a bit higher?
I might go a little higher, Ad. I might go 8, just because Thailand is a cool place to be. There's always a fun atmosphere here at the Buriram circuit. Well over 80,000 people here on race day. Loved hearing the massive cheers going up every time Somkiat Chantry made an overtake in the Moto2 race. Yeah, it's been quite fun seeing your first reaction of this Grand Prix and of this part of the world. So yeah, overall, pretty solid weekend, I would say.
It was a little dismal arriving to the circuit this morning and finding Park 1 partially flooded, because it has been so hot and sunny. Actually, well, it's been deteriorating really in terms of the climate since we first arrived here. But I'm going to give it an 8.5 purely because my Grand Prix viewing experience today consisted of standing outside the media center and watching. You can see most of the Buriram or Chang International Circuit layout from here. It's not quite as comprehensive as, say, Red Bull Ring, but then you can watch it and then there's a big screen right in front of you, so you're not missing anything. And then you do, like you say, get that feeling and the atmosphere from the crowd. They're really sort of responsive and reactive here in Thailand. And, it was just a great experience, not actually sort of watching MotoGP through a screen, even though you're at an event, which is usually the case for us in the media center. So I really enjoyed it. It was kind of like, being trackside again, as like a fan as a kid. Almost like watching a football match as well, where you kind of have an investment, but it's in a different kind of way. So I'm going to give it an 8.5 for that. And I think there's a whole backdrop, of course, as we'll talk about with the World Championship this year, but also for the future, because MotoGP will be coming back here and launch in 2025 in several ways, not only through the pre-season test, but of course the championship launch, which is going to happen somewhere in Bangkok, which is like a 5-hour drive away or an hour flight from here, and then of course the first Grand Prix. So an 8.5. Neil, what was kind of your moment?
Well, I'm going to roll two moments into one ad, because obviously Pecco Baganaia was really made to work hard for his 9th victory of the season here today on Sunday. And my two moments of the weekend were when Marc Marquez attempted overtakes on Pecco down into the final turn of turn 12. Briefly passed him, but on both occasions Pecco did not relent. And I have to say, at the point of watching, I was thinking, Pecco, just let him pass, because it's clear that he's quicker than you. Just let him go and don't risk everything, because at that point it really did seem as though he was living dangerously, living right on the edge. But I think it spoke of Pecco's determination, Pecco's desire to try and put as many points into Jorge Martin as possible. And there was a little bit of Jerez about his kind of immediate response on both occasions. So I thought it was it kind of demonstrated not just Pecco's bottle and metal in high pressure situations today, but I think we also saw those kind of battling instincts which haven't always been apparent in races in 2024.
Can I just point out that Marc Marquez has interfered in the championship again? In fact, he's done it twice. He's managed to do it twice, because first of all, he interfered in favour of Jorge Martin by not overtaking Pecco Baganaia. And then he intervened in the favour of Pecco Baganaia by crashing out. So, or I think I've got that the other way around, actually. But basically he could have taken points away from Pecco, and he didn't, and he could have taken points away from Martin, and he didn't. So he's definitely somehow cheating. I'm making up this conspiracy theory and getting my conspiracy theories in first.
Sepang is next week, Dave.
Yeah, but I mean, look, you've got to get it in sort of early. We've got to get ahead of the game.
Sepang 2015 happened the week before, we all know that. It all started in Phillip Island.
Dave, what was your moment from this Grand Prix?
My moment of the Grand Prix was, David Alonso has been absolutely fantastic all season. I think this was his 12th win, breaking Valentino Rossi's record, and he did it in 18 races, which is extremely impressive. But my moment was when he was at the end of Q2. He had a time. He knew he was going to start sort of fairly well, and he rolls out into pit lane, and everyone is sitting there waiting, and he just sits there, and he sits there, and he sits there. He knows that they're waiting for him. So they can get a tow, because a tow is really worth something around Chang, and he just sits there and lets the clock tick down, and lets it tick down beyond the point at which anyone can actually make a lap and set a better time. He was very much making a point. It really felt like he was like, I'm not going to tow you around, and B, if you are going to hang around for me, I'm going to completely ruin it for you, which is. I've worried about, will he be, how strong is he going to be mentally when he goes up to Moto2? But this was like a demonstration of I will crush you. I don't care. I will break you. So that was great. I really, really enjoyed that.
He's watching Moto3 qualifying as well as Moto3 races this year. Should we be alarmed?
It was by accident.
Yeah, I think was that on Twitter somewhere. Maybe
no. I got up a little bit earlier than normal, so I got like the last sort of something like the last 10 or 15 minutes or something. I went back, or I went back and watched it, but it was very enjoyable.
Yeah, he's got this. Sorry, just briefly to add something on Alonso. He's got this boy next door image, and he's very polite and well spoken, as we've mentioned many, many times on the podcast already. But I agree with Dave. There was a few little glimpses at a tougher, steelier, harder competitor. And I also loved on Saturday morning when he threw it up the inside of Angel Piqueras. Piqueras was on a flying lap. Alonso wasn't on a fast lap at the end of the second practice session, just to basically F up his lap and say to Piqueras, "Oi, I'm number one here. And it was just a little kind of bit of prickly behaviour that we haven't really seen so much from him before this year. But the kind of prickly behaviour that you see with the absolute top guys, like with the Rossis and the Marquezes of this parish. So yeah, great stuff from David. I love to see that kind of shithousery enter the competitive sphere from time to time.
Yeah, there was milestones, of course, in Moto3 with David Alonso, and also Moto2. We'll talk a little bit about the new world champion later on. My moment, Dave and I were talking about this just before we started recording. There was a great TV shot of a little boy weeping his heart out due to Marc Marquez's crash, and I just thought that typified some of the sort of passion that you see here in Thailand, because I think of all the hundreds, thousands of people I've seen across this Grand Prix, I struggle to remember one without some sort of apparel from a brand or a rider or a team. I mean, it's really intense MotoGP country.
Yeah, I mean, it's really well spotted by both the cameraman or the camera operator and the TV director, because it was maybe 6, 7, 8, something like that, and he had a 93 sort of shaved into the side of his head, and the tears were properly streaming down his face. It was class.
My moment was, sorry, Neil, to cut across, was just quickly to mention during the race, Jorge Martin was running third, and there was just this nagging feeling all the way that, there could be some sort of mistake, either from the leader or from Martin, which really would have thrown the cat amongst the pigeons for the championship. And he ran wide going into turn 4, went across the curb, and obviously everybody knows how slippery those things can be when they're wet. And went briefly off track. I didn't actually see if it was on TV or not, but I was standing next to a couple of, colleagues, 2 of them from Dorna, and we were kind of like, whoa, it was a seriously big moment where you thought Martin could have been down, and that could have been a big, big gesture towards the 2024 title outcome. So I think that was, it was just one little flicker of kind of excitement or unexpected incidents during that Grand Prix that kind of made it more memorable, I suppose. Yeah, so anyway, moving on, a reminder, guys, that on the Paddock Pass podcast, we're backed by KTM. So go and have a look at ktm.com if you're in the market for a new bike, whether it's off-road, adventure, naked bikes or sport bikes. Go and have a quick browse there. Fly Racing as well, 25 years of Fly. If you're after some new gear, some new helmets, some new protection, then flyracing.com has a cavern full of choice. So go and have a look, as well as rental.com. If you have a street bike or a road bike, there are loads of accessories for those particular models, not just off-road, where rental are definitely king of the crop. Let's move on, guys, a little bit more. We're going to talk about some of the predictions actually we posted on Patreon, which was quite amusing across this weekend. I think, Neil, I don't know what mischievous part of you wanted to ask what was going to be the slowest Ducati, from the race today, but the answer, of course, was Enea Bastianini. Ducati, of course, swept the board with the top 8 on Saturday, but Bastianini's crash was costly. The sprint winner went down. He was the last one across the line that actually finished. And Jono and Stuart Edwards correctly predicted that one. Who predicted that Pecco Baganaia would win? Well, that honour goes to Lynn Biggs, Gray Lunsford, Stuart Edwards and Craig Stanyon. So they all got their particular calls right through Patreon. Alpine Stars Paddock Pass Podcast Fantasy League. My thoughts are well known on this particular competition. Dave, I don't know if you've had a chance to look at your particular team and how you're getting on.
I have, and it's not good. I made the genius decision of swapping out Pecco Baganaia and putting in Marc Marquez and Pedro Acosta. So that mind you, it was Maverick Vinales that I swapped for Pedro Acosta. So it wasn't that bad. But yeah, no, I should have stuck with. I would have been better off sticking with Pecco Baganaia, I think. But I've dropped a few places down to 52 for 52nd in the PvP league. So I don't know how Neil has done. I think I get a strong feeling that Neil is closing in on me.
Neil, how's Steve's team? Oh, Neil, how's your team?
I only gained a couple of points, Dave, so you can sleep easy tonight. I think you've got this. You've got this under wraps.
Well, I mean, he's certainly going to win the contest out of us. We'll have to keep a watch in the next couple of weeks who's going to win the overall competition, because they are going to get a big goodie box from Alpine Stars, and we'll be in touch with that particular winner. Rubbish competition anyway. I don't think we'll be doing it again next year, that's for sure. Well, listen, Dave. I mean, you made your bet for you took Pecco Baganaia out of your team before Q1, and it was probably a half decent decision on Saturday. But then today, Bagnaia was brilliant. I mean, it was another faultless performance under a lot of pressure as well in very difficult conditions. To you first, Neil, I mean, we were sitting in a press conference together listening to what Pecco had to say. Amazingly, it was his first Grand Prix win in wet weather conditions. Yes, I think it's his 9th victory this season, if I remember the statistics well. I somehow have the feeling, maybe this is the next point we'll talk about, when we talk about the championship fight, I kind of had the feeling that Jorge Martin is slightly more deserving of the championship this year, just through brute consistency. But I mean, Bagnaia has raised his level in terms of really being able to dominate his rivals and dominate MotoGP and the conditions that face him on a particular day.
Yep, I think we saw this right the way through last year when Pecco is backed up against the wall and really has to deliver. He somehow finds it within himself to do so. I think you look at this victory just by itself and it's like, okay, he's really managed a wet weather race to perfection and done it expertly so, resisting the advances of Marc Marquez, which in the wet is really commendable. But I think if you look at it in the context of how the weekend sort of played out, I think it's even more impressive, really, because on Saturday it really did look as though Pecco was in trouble. He was beaten pretty soundly by Martin in the sprint. Martin was 5th, I think, at the first lap, and Pecco was 2nd. Martin managed to overturn that deficit, and Pecco didn't really have an answer for him in the closing laps. And we just saw, after the sprint podium, Pecco in discussion with Gigi, Gabarini, a couple of other figures from his circle, and the mood looked really quite down and quite dire. It almost looked like one of those shots you see when people are kind of starting to accept their fate, that this isn't going to be their year. But it reminded me a little bit of the Indonesian Grand Prix last year, when on Saturday it really did look as though all was lost for him and that the momentum was decisively in Martin's favour. But Pecco managed to wrestle control of it again and kind of swing it back in his favour. So I think this must stand as one of his more impressive rides. It maybe wasn't the most exciting because he did kind of dominate it once Marquez crashed out and just controlled it pretty comfortably at the front. But considering the stress of the situation and really the fact that he couldn't make any mistakes whatsoever, I thought, this was excellent. You had everyone yesterday saying that he has to beat Martin today. Everyone was saying it. Marc Marquez was saying it, and Pecco would have known that. He came up trumps yet again. It does look as though he's going to take this down to Valencia, which maybe wasn't so certain on Saturday afternoon.
Yeah, good shout. I also think I agree that he needed a result today, and heading towards Malaysia, and Bagnaia has this really strong and strange relationship with the Sepang International Circuit. I think he took his 2nd Moto3 win there. He won his Moto2 World Championship. And the last 2 years in MotoGP have just been incredible pressure cookers. Both in 2022 when he was trying to, gain an advantage to seize his first title, and then of course last year, that was another an important stage in the 2023 title story. So once again, Bagnaia and Ducati are going to Malaysia with a lot on the line, and I think it makes a difference that it's 17 points instead of 22. But Dave, how do you see it? Because did Marc let him off the hook in some ways at this particular Grand Prix?
I think so. Certainly Marc was convinced that he was faster than Pecco, and he probably was. It's just that he crashed out, made a mistake. 1.5 degrees too much lean angle, he said, and that was it. And it looked like he might even be able to save it, which again, on his right side, which for years he hasn't been able to do. So it's a sign of how much stronger his right arm is, the arm that he damaged so badly. Bagnaia was incredibly strong, and it's almost becoming like a weakness of Pecco Bagnaia's that he is so strong under pressure that it's almost like he needs that kind of pressure to really perform at that sort of ultimate level. So often you'll see, we've seen him earlier in the year, leading a race, well clear of everybody else, and then managing to crash out for no reason at all. It's almost like he seems to lose concentration, and he needs the pressure of a championship situation to really eliminate those errors, which I think is good for him in the championship overall. But yeah, I mean, it was, and it's so hard to believe that this was his first ever wet win. Like he has won a lot, and you sort of like think he must have won others, but no. I mean, it's remarkable, really, and it's not because he's slow in the wet or anything. It's not like there are some riders who as soon as it gets greasy or as soon as it gets wet, they just disappear into anonymity, and that's not Baganaia's case at all. It's just that it's sort of he never managed to put it together, and he absolutely put it together today. And it was also what Neil was saying about the atmosphere. It was positively funereal yesterday. I mean, they were standing around like they were actually at a funeral, like it was, at someone's deathbed. And then today there was, I think you saw the way that Baganaia crossed the line, that incredible just release of joy. That was when you saw how difficult it was yesterday, because that was a sign of, how much pressure it released today.
I was quite impressed by the fact that he was asked in the press conference afterwards about his thoughts when Marc crashed out. And he said he was actually quite annoyed, pissed off when he realised that he had 2.5 seconds back to, or maybe it was 2 seconds back to Martin at that stage, because Jorge was going to score more points. He wasn't going to have a 9-point advantage over Jorge. It was going to be 5 points. And you would have thought maybe there was part of him that would have been looking at Marc as the superior competitor. But I think it's just a sign of Pecco being so sure of himself and someone of his convictions that he really felt that he could have defended against Marc, even if Marc was quite a bit stronger. Really impressive stuff. And I just think the kind of the quality of this year's championship has to be commended. I know Ducati GP24 is streets ahead of the other bikes on the grid. But what Pecco and Martin are doing this year, I think, is really quite astounding. When you look at, there's been mistakes from both parties, there's no doubt about that. But when you look at their results, the consistency is absolutely incredible. I think it's kind of cool that we're looking at one of those championship fights, which I think is so high in quality that we'll maybe be talking about it for years to come. Maybe the racing hasn't been epically brilliant this year like it has been in other seasons, but I think that the championship fight is of the absolute highest quality.
Yeah, I think it's also, you have to remember, why are these guys making mistakes? Because they're on the absolute limits of the package that they've got. And, look at Enea Bastianini, it was so strong yesterday because he made the start. And today, the track was, the whole climate was different, but then it was just a much more challenging scenario. It just shows the tiny margins that there are between being in an ideal situation to take profit of that Ducati or, having to struggle, and those two are buggering off again into the distance. I mean, we all know that Marc Marquez is probably going to change the landscape somewhat in 2025. And of course, Martin could be taking that number one plate to another manufacturer. But yeah, I think, the points you've made, guys, are completely valid. If I gave you €50 then, what would be your placement of a bet for the title, considering with 2 rounds left and 74 points left to go?
For me, it's no question. It's Jorge Martin has the advantage, and in fact, he's come out of this weekend stronger than he came out of the race stronger than yesterday. Yesterday, he had 22 points. He had a 22-point lead with 21 points possible sort of left to be distributed. Now he has a 17-point lead, and there's 14 points is the difference between first and second until the rest of the championship. So in fact, Martin has 17. Oh, sorry, 16.
16 points left available if he's to finish second.
So 10, 16, yes. Sorry, yeah. So, oh, gosh, all right. Oh, my maths is completely wrong. In which case, I sat down and actually worked this out. And then, because I was thinking about yesterday and about the fact that he only gained 2 points. But yes, 60 points. All right. Well, in that case, he's still in the same place, and I think he said so in the press conference. You know, he from Motegi, he's only lost 3 points to Baganaia. Needs to score a lot more if he's going to catch him up.
Dave, I'm never going to trust one of your Excel sheets again. Neil, same question to you. I mean, who's your money on? But, if anything, this weekend almost went a little bit to formula. Jorge's been very much the second place man. I mean, I don't mean that in a poor way. I think that consistency is something he needed to improve from 2023, and he's done that.
Yeah, I think that's a very valid point, Dad. If I was to put money, I'm still going on Baganaia just because he's been there. He's been there before twice. He's done it before twice, and I think that will eventually tell and pay. But yeah, there's kind of like a nice symmetry. That was Pecco's ninth feature race win of the year, his 15th win overall if you include sprints. It was also Jorge's ninth feature race second place and his 15th overall if you include sprints. So it does show you that Martin has been a real hound for the runners-up spot. And I think today was probably the most important and maybe the most impressive of all. He maybe got a little fortunate that Marc crashed out ahead of him. But when you consider just how many moments he was having, I mean, you spoke about that moment at turn 4 ad, which you saw from just above the grandstand where the media center is. I mean, he said, I think in the race he had 15, 16 quite considerable front end moments. I remember there was one lap where it looked as though he had 3 in one single lap, and you thought, man, he's really skirting on the very ragged edge of disaster here. But he just about kept it in place. So I thought Jorge's performance overall this weekend was really commendable. He said today was like a kind of the last final exam that you have in school, where it's like the ultimate test of your kind of capabilities, because it really was a big challenge, a real curveball. You know how strong Jorge had been in the dry all weekend long, and I'm sure that part of him was thinking, cursing the gods that had sent the rain to the Buriram track today, because if it was dry, I think maybe the chances are that he would have beaten Pecco. But as it was, I think he did a fine job and did exactly what he needed to do. There was a real sense of relief that he had overcome this obstacle, because it was such a potential banana skin for him. And there were so many moments where I thought, oh, it was like when Marc crashed. He had a massive front end slide there as well, which he was very lucky to save. So I think Martin can be very, very pleased with his performance. And just a quick mention for his sprint performance yesterday, it was also absolutely superb. And another race where you got the impression he was right on the ragged edge, giving absolutely everything. So yeah, great stuff from Martin.
Yeah, he was brilliant. And yeah, there were 2 second places, but it does somehow feel a lot more. Although I disagree with him on the notion of it being a final exam, because I think he's going to be under the cosh in terms of what he'll have to face in Malaysia, and then as we've seen with Baganaia in 2022 and 2023, Valencia is going to be a big test, I think, of his resolve as a professional athlete. In the build up, and then also across that sort of 72-hour period where the scrutiny is going to be on a different level than what he even faced last year. I remember going to Qatar last year, and there was already a lot of temperature, I should say, around the situation, and then it didn't quite go to plan for him when it came to the race itself and the choice, of course, with the tires, how it all backfired. But the championship's in a fascinating place at the moment.
I do think that it's going to be easier for Martin to go in leading. It's always easy if you can go in leading, and it's going to depend on the size of the lead that he takes into Valencia. If it's still in double figures, then it's comfortable. If he loses 8, 9, 10 points to Baganaia, then it really is all up in the air.
I think it's also really interesting. I said this on the Note Show yesterday. It's a different situation for Baganaia. Obviously, he was the leader going into these final races in 2023. Martin was chasing him. And even when he was chasing Fabio Quartararo in 2022, his technical advantage was so superior that you felt that he didn't always have to ride at the absolute ragged edge to gain points over Fabio's Yamaha at that particular time. This time is completely different. And Marquez, I think, said on Saturday after the sprint that Pecco really does need to start risking a lot. And that's not the ideal situation to be in, because risking a lot obviously can lead to more mistakes. So yeah, I think it's fascinatingly poised heading to Sepang, and Sepang has been a great track for Pecco in the last couple of years, but yeah, it's not going to. Yeah, I mean he's really going to have to overcome some considerable hurdles, and it's not just going to be enough for him to beat Martin. It's going to have to be Jorge slipping up to result in Pecco retaining his crown.
Dave, Marc Marquez, I think, has won like 50%, of the last couple of races. And, his blunder today, I think was quite unexpected, right? Because these were perfect conditions for Marc to show the superior sort of feeling he has on the Ducati. Brad Binder, I think, told us in his media debrief that turn 8 was like ice. And because the riders had already done 2 right-handers before coming to that turn, and the right side of the tyre was getting, if not hot, then certainly kind of worn or slightly abused, and that was leading to some of the problems. I just wondered how you saw the crash, and is that a little bit typical of what we've seen of Marc this year, where he's mixing brilliance with blunders?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of factors. I think also because it was clear that he was slower through down the straights. The Ducati, obviously, the GP24 has a lot of advantage in that with the ride height device. Again, this was something that Marquez pointed out. The GP24 has got this new ride height device. It drops the bike lower and it allows it to accelerate more. That was where he was losing out. So the only place that he could be faster was through that sort of like slower section, through those slow corners. He said basically the only chance that he had to overtake was into turn 12. So he had to line Pecco up, get ready. So really, if it was he had to push, that was the only place he could push. He had to take a certain amount of risk. The front tires, actually, the KTMs were very interesting, and I think because looking at the track, it was wet and it was still raining, but it was not absolutely sodden. It kept on looking like there might be the first beginnings of a dry line that never really materialized. But everyone was on the medium, was on the medium wet, and I think that it might have just been a little bit softer than was really needed. The Brad Binder, Jack, they were both saying, the front tire was a little bit soft. There was a little bit of movement. It was soft on the side. So I do think that he was sort of pushing the front quite a lot, and that was why he ended up crashing out. He had to. He knew what he had to do. He knew there were limited options to pass, and he just pushed too fast, too hard through that corner and let go. He held his hand up and said, "My mistake." But yeah, I think it's one of those things. To an extent, yes, it is reflective of his championships so far, of his adaptation to the Ducati. But I think it's also reflective of the weakness of the GP23 compared to the GP24.
Yeah, and Marc was really kicking himself afterwards because he said he was impatient, and when he remounted and then fought back to finish just outside the top 10.
Without a rear brake.
Yeah, without a rear brake, he was still posting faster lap times than Pecco up front. Obviously, Pecco was controlling the gap to Jorge just behind. But Marc thought in that state he was still ridiculously strong. So, it was mid-race. There was still a massive amount of time to go. And I know Marc was a little impatient because every time he got close to Pecco, his front tire started to overheat. But you just felt that if he had bided his time, maybe 5, 6, 7 laps, and Pecco starts thinking a bit more towards the championship in those closing laps, then the race would have been his. But yeah, he just got a little bit overexcited. So big blunder. I think he said today, we've won races so far this year when we weren't the fastest. This was a race that we didn't win when we were the fastest. And yeah, there's not been so many opportunities for Marc to say he's been the absolute fastest rider out there this year.
Yeah, one of the reasons for him bumping into Joan Mir was because of that lack of rear brake. And also he claimed that he was kind of alongside Mir coming, on the approach to the corner, and then was carrying too much speed. The whole drop one position angle as well. I mean, he was just being cute with that one and kept going, knowing that post-race he wouldn't have to deal with, you'd have to deal with far less complication than having to, get into the mire of the track action that was happening while during the final phases of the Grand Prix. It wasn't such a. Sorry, go on now.
I think race direction and the stewards had footage which showed that Marc actually did drop a position.
He did. He said,
"Yeah." So, so I think there were a few people that were a little suspicious that he had done something a bit cheeky and had ignored that until the end of the race. But I think race direction clarified that he did drop a position. And just on the Mir thing, he said that Mir had lost like 3 or 4 positions just prior to that coming together at turn 3, and clear that Marc was faster, yet Mir decided to really try and tough it out and turned into that turn 3 corner, leaving him with nowhere really to go. And without rear brake, he was like, well, if you want to play this game, contact's going to be inevitable. I'm going to be better off. So, he obviously came out on top, and I'm not sure if it was the wisest move for Mir to commit the way he did around the outside, especially when Marc's there. I mean, you know what's going to happen.
Yeah, exactly. No, I mean, Marc said sort of basically, look, I knew I was going to get a penalty when that happened. And I knew it would be, when I saw a drop 1 position, I knew what I had to do. I had to get, past someone and then drop it back and then take it again. And that in itself speaks of an enormous amount of confidence, where you can just go, that's all right, I'll just pass the bloke ahead and then drop back and then go and get past again. So I think that also speaks to his speed.
Overall, not the best Grand Prix for the Marquez. Alex falling off on the sighting lap. I think he explained that he tried to go through a certain line just to see how wet it was, and before he knew it, he was on the floor.
Very wet.
Yeah. It might be best to paddle through that particular line next time, Alex, when it comes to trying that approach. Let's move on to the third step of the podium. Pedro Acosta. He's only finished 1 Grand Prix in the last 4, and that was on the podium in Indonesia, and he managed to return there. Guys, it was a particularly kind of bustling performance, wasn't it? I mean, Jack Miller had been holding 3rd place for a long time after Marc Marquez had crashed. Jack said in the last 3 laps his tyre had pretty much fallen off the face of the planet. Brad Binder was having a similar issue, but Acosta was able to have enough traction, enough rubber to really make some cool moves. I think he was also saying in the press conference, Neil, we were both sitting there, that in the first phases of the race, he was being very controlled, very calm. He was very aware that he just needed to get a race finish after what had been a pretty dry streak of non-results. So, but it was good stuff from the youngster, from the rookie, and pretty much bounced back to form.
Yeah, I mean, I would go several steps further than you, I'd say it was pretty incredible stuff from Acosta. I mean, his first race in MotoGP, he had a pretty tentative beginning, understandably so, because I think he had failed to finish 7 of the previous 11 races, sprints included, which is a pretty high attrition rate, even if he is a rookie, and even if he was pushing towards the front of the races in those occasions. So he definitely had it in the forefront of his mind that he needed to finish. And I think yesterday when he crashed out of the sprint, he said, we need to understand that a 5th place or a 6th place is actually a decent result. So I think considering that, also have to bear in mind that he injured his left shoulder just a week ago on Phillip Island. Okay, the wet conditions made it easier, less demanding for him to ride, but that's another thing I think to ponder. And just to see how he gradually came to terms with the bike in the wet over a single race distance over 26 laps, I thought was quite remarkable. It kind of brought to mind Marc Marquez's first ever MotoGP wet race in Le Mans 2013, where basically took him like 10 to 12 laps to work it out, and then suddenly he was like the fastest rider on track. And you thought, okay, so that's how quickly it took Marc to understand how to ride a MotoGP bike in the wet, 10 to 12 laps. Okay, Pedro's had quite a few wet sessions this year, but to do it in wet race, in the circumstances that I mentioned, and to beat 2 KTMs, one of which is a well-known wet specialist, I thought was absolutely sensational. I thought this was maybe not quite his most impressive podium to date, but just another sign of how ludicrously talented Pedro is and how quick he is at adapting to very challenging and quite new circumstances and situations for himself. So yeah, brilliant performance from the rookie.
Yeah, it was also very interesting that both Brad and Jack were talking about the rear spinning up. The KTM seemed to have a particular problem with that, and it's something that Pedro just never really mentioned. You know, like Whether he had the problem or not, we don't know. But he never mentioned it. Didn't think it was a particular problem, or certainly not a problem worth mentioning. Which suggests that he has a little bit more subtlety in his throttle control or something, or the way that he's being given the control over the power to be able to manage it a little better. And also, perhaps it's a little bit easier for Acosta, and this is going to be really interesting next year when people are going from the Pirellis to the Michelins. But the Dunlop wet was notoriously difficult. Yes, yes. There was basically one compound. There was one wet compound which would get used at Phillip Island when it was, or Valencia when it was like 7 degrees, or a place like Thailand or Sepang where it's sort of 30 degrees. So there wasn't a great deal of feeling from it. So to actually have a tyre which gives you a lot more feedback and a lot more response in the wet is and made it easier. And I think that was also what Acosta needed to sort of figure out. That was why it took him a few laps to actually figure out to actually put it all together. And once he put it all together, then he was unstoppable. Just genuinely very, very impressive ride by Acosta.
Yeah, and he was, I wouldn't say hopeless in the wet in Model 2. I mean, you mentioned the Dunlop front tyre, which he said just never really given that much feel. Michelin, by contrast, is the opposite. But yeah, to go from a fairly average wet weather rider in the Model 2 class to being on the podium in his first MotoGP race, I mean, is quite impressive as well. So yeah, absolute kudos to Pedro.
Yeah, the weather conditions, of course, playing into the hands of the KTM and also the Aprilias. I mean, Robert Vinales was quite dejected on Saturday. He said he had absolutely no grip. A much better performance today, of course, the weather helping out with that. Alessio Spargaro as well started the weekend in the worst way, and then actually, managed to seem reasonably content for what is ultimately the last couple of races of his career. But guys, let's move on to our winners and losers. Kind of on that note, Dave, who was it that stood out for you?
Well, my winner is Jorge Martin, because I think he took a big step closer to the championship this weekend. Even though he has lost 3 points, it's only 3 points. He's shown that he can be exactly where he needs to be with Jorge Martin for the remaining races. This is all he needs to do. All he needs to do is finish second, and the championship is his. So I think he seemed to grow in confidence. He was also. I mean, you really saw the contrast between Pecco Baganaia when on Saturday Baganaia was absolutely down in the dumps, and on Sunday he's elated. Whereas Martin was almost sort of slightly annoyed coming second on Saturday, but very pleased coming second on Sunday. So I think, and he just seems more relaxed, more sort of calm about the whole thing. He doesn't seem so antsy. Obviously, it's more difficult for me to judge from here. You two have been around him. But I think Jorge Martin, I think this was it wasn't a perfect weekend by any stretch of the imagination, but I think precisely because it wasn't a perfect weekend, that's why Martin really made a step.
My winner was Jack Miller. I'm going to give him a bit more credit, Neil, than you did by saying that Pedro Acosta was superior. Okay, Miller had to come from the fifth row of the grid. He said that his tyres dropped off mainly because he had to make those moves in the first few laps to get as far up as he did. And for a rider that's just been struggling for any semblance of confidence or feeling with the RC16 to get over those chattering or vibration issues, I thought this was a pretty good performance. And a reminder that, when it comes to ultimate feeling on a motorcycle, then Miller's up there. He's in the upper elite and fully deserves another year in MotoGP. I thought it was really timely, that kind of performance, and that he is deserving still of a place on the grid. So that was my shout. For you, Neil?
Yeah, I think it's a good shout out to give Jack a mention. Also, fantastic the way he just wouldn't accept Acosta to get his third place at the time. He really did go all in trying to recover the position. Also, should have mentioned Acosta's round the outside pass into turn 3 was just absolutely insane, like fabulous, like one of the overtakes of the entire race. But back to my winner. very briefly, quick shout out to Fabio Di Giannantonio, because he came home in fourth, his farewell race before he goes under the knife. His left shoulder will be fixed. He'll miss the final 2 races of the year.
He's my loser.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Well, just a quick shout out for his race. Digio was down in 11th place early on. With 10 laps to go on lap 16, he was 10 seconds back of Pecco Baganaia, 10.1 seconds back. By the checkered flag, he was 4.6 seconds back. So he was, comfortably the fastest rider on track in the final 10 laps. And had he not had such a shaky, nervous feeling in the early laps, he definitely would have been on the podium. Maybe he would have been up there fighting with Martin and Pecco. Digio's had a great kind of send-off. Phillip Island was a great comeback this weekend as well. But I have to mention Aigura, the new Moto2 world champion, not necessarily for his performance today, but just for his season as a whole. It's been a weird roller coaster season in Moto2 when very few riders have been able to put together any kind of semblance of a consistent campaign, but Aigura has been the exception. And an interesting stat that came to light over the weekend: he's led just 20 laps this year. He's won 3 races and he's scored just 2 pole positions. So it's not been one of those crazy campaigns where he's been racking up David Alonso-esque numbers in Moto3, but he has made consistency count. He's made his intelligence count. And I think he said in his press conference after winning the championship today, he knows that he's not the most talented rider on the grid. He knows he's not even the fastest Moto2 rider on the grid this year yet. I think just a sort of a big picture view of this season has really paid off, and Aigura has definitely been a deserving champion. And had he not got a dove tire at Silverstone and broken his hand in practice in Austria, where he was streaks ahead of the rest, he probably could have wrapped this championship up last weekend. So yeah, chapeau to Aigura, first world champion from Japan since 2009, just a really nice guy to boot. I know he maybe comes across as a bit shy, not the most outgoing personality, but when you speak to him when the camera's not pointed in front of him, he is like a really grounded, nice, humble kind of guy. So yeah, big shout out to I.
Yeah, I'm going to intervene with in the Digio question, because for me he's a winner as well, because he's actually making the sensible decision. I had a very brief conversation with him in Misano about this, and he by missing a couple of races, he's actually doing the right thing, getting his shoulder fixed, so that he can come back the beginning of the next season fitter, ready to start the season in good shape. It's so difficult for riders to do that. It's so difficult for riders to actually take the time to make the right decision about their long-term future. The focus is always on next race. Sometimes it's almost just on the next session. Their view of the future is, like FP2 and no further. So for him to make this decision to step away from racing for a couple of races, to miss out on a test, to go and get his shoulder fixed and just focus and concentrate on being fit in time for the start of the 2025 season, I think deserves a shout out.
Yeah, just from my side, an addition and an explanation. The addition being Trackhouse, Neil, to your shout for winner, because suddenly that decision to hire Aigura looks a little bit more shrewd. I think there is a question in there somewhere about Sergio Garcia and whether his results and form and subsequent meltdown was perhaps a gift in some way to his teammate for the championship. But then it proves that you do have to have some sort of mental capability to come back from knocks or setbacks or whatever. And clearly the Japanese, for the examples that you pointed out, especially at the broken hand in Austria, was up to the task. So Trackhouse have got themselves a world champion in their stable for 2025. Explanation, because I had Digio down as my loser, because even as much as, say, 14 months ago, he was a little bit kind of like the invisible man of MotoGP. I mean, in his media debriefs, there would be just a couple of us. He wasn't particularly shining, on the Ducati amongst that huge flock of riders. But suddenly turned it all around in Qatar. And since then, he's become probably one of the factory's more consistent performers. And that shoulder injury that he's been persevering with has just sort of ruined his season a little bit. I mean, he's sort of persevered as long as he could And it's just a shame in a way that, you saw it again today in, again, varying conditions, what he could do. So I hope he's going to be fully fit for the start of 2025, because shoulder injuries are notoriously fickle in terms of the lasting impression or implications that they have. So, yeah, anyway, somewhat tongue-in-cheek, but Digi is my loser. Dave, who was yours?
I'm going to have two losers, one of them very quickly, and that is MotoGP, because we had...
The series is going to have a championship fight that goes to the final round for the third straight year. How can you say that?
And yet, once again, on Saturday, we saw 8 Ducatis in the top 8, which tells you everything which is wrong with the series at the moment. It's become an extremely technical series. The bike has become much more important. I think that was Ducati's 15th win in a row, 64 races in a row with at least one Ducati in the podium. I've forgotten how many poles and front row starts it's just become it's become utterly dominant. Dominance is always bad. It doesn't matter who does it. The period of of dominant Spanish champions, of Italian champions, of the Duan period, the domination of the Americans in the 90s, the Brits in the 50s and 60s. This was always bad. This has always been bad because this needs to be an international championship. And again, I think it's quite heartening to see Iogura actually become champion, because we really need that kind of sort of breadth. And my other loser is Marc Marquez, because he had a win and he threw it away.
Dave, what do you have against Mick Doohan? You're always bringing him up in negative terms. One of the best champions there's ever been. One of the
absolutely. Mick Doohan is absolutely one of the most talented riders ever one of the most talented riders to ever throw a leg over a bike, and one of the most determined and gritty racers to ever throw. But he completely ruined it. I mean, it was just immensely tedious to watch. Plus, he would win, and then he would look as if he'd just found a turd in his coffee. It was just it was an utterly joyless experience. The whole thing was completely, utterly joyless. So I was watching World Superbike. I was watching Frankie Keeley charge into the Assen press room in a dressing room and shout at Carl Fogarty, because that was much more entertaining.
Blue dressing gown it was as well. Fetching.
There you go.
Yeah. But,
very fetching.
I mean, put yourself in Mick's shoes. Like, one week you're racing Schwantz and Rainey and Lawson and some of the greatest ever, and the next you're trying to shake off, I don't know, Nobuatsu Aoki and Alex Gravier, who can't lead races by themselves.
He offered to slow down, though.
He didn't offer to slow down. He said, "What do you want me to do? Slow down?" The answer to that is yes. That's exactly what we want you to do.
Or change that bike.
That is exactly what Valentino Rossi understood. Like he was up against Max Biaggi, and it was quite clear right from the outset that Biaggi was was never going to be strong enough to beat Valentino Rossi. So all Rossi would do is sit behind him and wait for him to make a mistake, and then bugger off at win by a few seconds at the end. So he made the racing look a lot more exciting than it was, which is very, very important.
Neil, aside from Dave's attention span and the 500s in the mid-90s, what's your loser? Speaking about this particular Grand Prix.
Yeah, worth just getting into the fact that Ducati's filling of the top 8 yesterday was the first time it's happened in a MotoGP race since Barcelona in 1996, when Honda did it, which goes to show you that this is not a regular thing, or hasn't been a regular thing over the last 3 decades.
But it does happen when you feel the grid for your motorcycles.
That is also very true, yes. And my loser is going to be one of the riders that is on a Ducati motorcycle, Franco Morbidelli, because he had 2 things that really stood out in the kind of slightly boneheaded race of the Italian, which was, well, firstly, he took out Fabio Quartararo, who was having a really strong race at that point by Yamaha standards in the rain. And it was, I mean, it just didn't really make sense at all. Quartararo was saying afterwards that if he had waited 3 more corners, he would have easily breezed past him on the exit of the final turn. Morbidelli even admitted as much that he was in too much of a rush. And you think, come on, mate, you're in, I don't know, Franco was a MotoGP rider in 2018. So this is his 7th MotoGP campaign. He shouldn't be making these kind of mistakes. And then after he did a very impressive long lap penalty, he then crashed on himself when he was one of the fastest riders on track. So there was a podium there for Franco. And there's been a couple of chances, a couple of opportunities that he's had to score really good results, but fallen short when he's had that potential. And today was another case in point. So, you don't want to be too harsh, but I mean, you can think of several other riders that are maybe more fitting receivers of a GP24 than he is. I mean, that does sound harsh, but I think it's the reality.
Next year, is he on a GP24 again?
Yep.
Yeah. His teammate will have the other one, right? The GP25, I mean.
Digi gets the GP25 and Frankie gets the GP24, which I think is, it's reflective of the balance of power in that team and deserved. Digi deserves it. He's proved all this year that he deserves it.
Well, he's going to get another year to get used to the brakes. So see if he gets a grasp on them by then. Well, listen, guys, thanks ever so much for listening. Dave and Neil, great to see you. Neil, well, I mean, you're like 20 meters away from me, so I've seen plenty of you. But I won't be seeing you next weekend because you're flying straight onto Sepang. I'm heading home, thank goodness. And then we'll be convening, all three of us, in Valencia for the season finale in, 3 weeks' time. So not far away at all. MotoGP is going to be over before you know it. Once again, just a reminder to head to our Patreon channel for any extra content. We'll be posting some files up there in the coming days. And we'll try to maybe rejoin on this Riverside platform for a show during the midweek. We'll have to check our movements, of course. Maybe Steve, now the Superbike season has finished, will join and offer his views on the MotoGP campaign as well. Any final thoughts, guys? Anything else to say?
Well, no, just looking forward to Sepang and seeing how that plays out. I mean, I'm going to be delighted that next year we won't have any of these triple headers because it's just too much motorbike racing.
Can you have such a thing, Neil?
Yes, you can.
So on that note, guys, thanks ever so much for listening to the show, and we'll be back very soon.